necessarily likes it, but it's the food of the gods.
Hi, you're listening to another episode of Not Zen, where we talk about Zen, whatnot, and occasionally what's not. Today we're looking at the 25th case of the BCR, otherwise known as the Blue Cliff Record. The title of this case is The Hermit of the Lotus Flower Peak Holds Up His Staff. Today we have 5 guests, including myself. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, it's me, holding up my staff. You know me, it's Dan.
Very nice, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Jim, and I count as 2 people.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm keen on this case. This is a good one, and one I don't feel like I've got a great handle on, which it always makes for the best ones, I think.
Speaking of getting a handle, whenever I'm at a peak, I always hold up my staff. I'm Aaron. Hello.
Is it a flower? Is it a flower staff as well, or
It's blooming.
it's blooming? Very nice.
Always blooming.
Yeah, if you guys, well, Dan, I usually really like it for my own sake, and I'm sure the listeners, when you kind of give a backdrop of what this text is, just, the 2 Zen masters involved in it.
Yeah, so long-time listeners, you'll know just to hit, that forward 15 seconds at this point. But new listeners or listeners who just like hearing it, so we're reading from the Blue Cliff Record, which is a compilation of 100 different what are called cases, sometimes called koans, preferably called cones. And they're kind of, these little, essentially what are little short stories, sometimes excerpts from works that Zen masters will reference. Most of the time, interactions or quotes between various Zen masters or Zen masters and monks. And so we have a compilation of these by Zen Master A, and his name is Zui Dao. And names are hard, so don't worry as much about his name, because we're pretty much only going to talk about him when we talk about the poem. That is because he compiled these 100 cases, put them in order from a larger treasure trove, and he wrote a poem or a verse on each of them. That's its own thing. Then Zen Master B, Yan Wu, he comes along and he takes this set of 100 cases and poems and he adds commentary, which is like pages, like right now we've got 4 or 5 pages just on the case we're about to do. So he had some extensive commentary and little notes. We'll talk about his notes. We'll talk about his commentary on both the case itself and the verse. And what I want you guys to keep in mind is the case itself is not a primary source. I mean, half this stuff, the very first case of the Blue Cliff Record involves Bodhidharma meeting the emperor. And Yan Wu says, well, the dates apparently don't match up because apparently Bodhidharma didn't get there until after he would have died. But that doesn't matter, right? The primary source material here is the actual verse and the commentary by Zui Dao and Yan Wu. That's the actual Zen masters talking about Zen to us. So that's something crucial to keep in mind that I didn't really think about for many years until after I was already reading this stuff. But yeah, that's the background. Today we're talking about the 25th.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I really like when I hear that because eventually I'll actually remember it. Zui Dao, whatever, writes the verse and Yan Wu the commentary. Very cool. And once again, for the listeners, today is the 25th case of the BCR. The Hermit of the Lotus Flower Peak holds up his staff. Is it okay with you guys if I read the case?
Go for it.
Please do.
You chose it, right?
I did. I flipped through the pages, and I actually, I went through it random, but I liked it because of the pointer. It got my eye. So here we go. Once again, 25th case of the BCR. The Hermit of the Lotus Flower Peak held up his staff and showed it to the assembly, saying, when the ancients got here, why didn't they consent to stay here? There was no answer from the assembly, so he himself answered for them, because they did not gain strength on the road. Again, he said, in the end, how is it? And again he himself answered in their place. With my staff across my shoulder, I pay no heed to people. I go straight into the myriad peaks. And that's the case. I will say that was really difficult for me because I've been doing a lot of Siri stuff. So I've been reading out sentences for her to write down. And you have to say comma and all that. So I kept almost saying, parentheses or quotation marks. When the ancients got here, comma. Why didn't they? So proud of myself. But yeah, anything that stands out to anyone?
Well, we have, the very first thing, the Hermit of Lotus Flower Peak. We don't get a Zen master by name. And if you ever, one rule of thumb is if you ever hear a story where a master and his student were walking through the woods, the one like, and you're not supposed to touch women, but you have to cross the river. And it's like, well, you're still carrying it. Like whenever you hear these kind of stories, probably means they're not actually Zen cases. The Zen cases typically involve specific Zen masters. Like there's like a handful of, there's like a pantheon, right? But we don't get one by name here. And typically a Zen master is one by name. So it already adds some suspicion. Is this a literal story? The Hermit of Lotus Flower Peak.
Does that go to say, Dan, that what makes this a case is the fact that a Zen master chose to talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. A Zen master was like, okay, this is like a thing that can express this principle, and to kind of unpack that for y'all unenlightened bunch, I'll write a poem. And then Zen Master B is like, I'll do you one up, and I'll write pages and pages.
And it also brings to mind, like, with those YouTube koans, which you referenced a little bit ago. I don't know which Zen Master was talking about those. I'd like to know who started them up, right? Which makes them worth their while.
I think some of those are in the Hakuin Sound of One Hand book.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right? Oh, okay.
Hakuin's responsible for a lot of that mischief. Listeners who think Hakuin's a Zen master, you got to beat him in Dharma battle, and then maybe, or he has to beat you.
Well, I guess what stood out to me was the two main phrases. When the ancients got here, why didn't they consent to stay here? And then his own reasoning for this is because they did not gain strength on the road. So again, we have kind of a double negative. So I presume the Zen master's talking about kind of like staying in one place and opening up a hermitage or something like that, a sangha. But the ancients, which are like the best, is usually what that means. The best of the best Buddhas, if you will, Zen masters.
Well,
they
or basically all the Zen masters
of
the past, right? Remember ancestor worship in China and all that jazz.
Yeah, they tend to have sort of an idea that society is in decay, and the further back you go, the more enlightened and everything people were.
Like Lord of the Rings.
And what's interesting here is, so his reasoning for it is because they did not gain strength on the road, which would imply that if they stayed in one place, they would get strong. So they didn't stay in one place.
Like their journey, they didn't like work out. So when they got to enlightenment, they didn't stay in it or something.
Well, there's the question even before that of what does strength have to do with if they stay here? I mean, really, the question before that is what the hell does he mean by here?
Right.
And I do want to quickly throw in that we have listeners. I mentioned notes from Yanwu earlier, and those are pretty much like line by line. He'll give a little tag on for each line of the case, and he'll do it later for the poem. But right after the case says, the Hermit of Lotus Flower Peak held up his staff and showed it to the assembly, saying, Yanwu says, look, he has the one eye on his forehead. Still, this is a nest for people these days. And I feel like this is kind of straightforward if you're familiar with the lingo of him basically saying, like, the fact that he held up his staff and showed it to the assembly, like, okay, so Yanwu is saying, okay, so this guy's a Zen master. But like him holding up the staff, which basically signified you were the Zen master of the monk or of the monastery for various reasons. I think it's a nest for people these days is kind of saying, oh, he's the Zen master, he'll have the answers, right? So it kind of begins with like, okay, if you think that what this guy's about to say is the answers, you're making a nest. And I think that relates to the rest of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the Yanwu's little comments after it is about he sets up a temporary city. Yeah, and that raising the staff, like Yan Men does the, he raises the staff and he goes, this is a dragon that swallows the whole earth, or somebody raises a staff and says all the Buddhas and patriarchs are on the tip of this staff, sort of thing. It tends to be a symbol of like, okay, this is the grain of rice with the whole world in it, everything wrapped up into this one little point. And then he's like, so why didn't they stay there? Which is interesting.
Oh, I didn't think about that. The here being holding the staff.
Oh,
Nice.
wow! It's amazing how many ways you can take these damn cases. I didn't think about any of these options.
The very first case of the Book of Serenity, I don't want to get too tangential, but the fact that it's the very first case makes it fun. The Book of Serenity, for the listeners, basically same format as the Blue Cliff Record, just with two different Zen masters. The very first one basically has this guy saying, order in the court, order in the court. The Buddha Dharma of Dharma Buddha is going to come sit down. And then the world honored one, or basically Buddha, ascends the seat, it says. And then the guy goes, see, look at him. He's the Dharma of all Dharmas. And then after that, then the guy leaves the seat. And so like the book begins with he ascends and then he leaves the seat. And that I think is
Nice, yeah.
I think that's good precedent for this. They did not gain strength on the road.
Yeah, that's confusing.
It is a tricky one. I think that consent word also is it feels like something that's been pulled out to match a translation that's not the simplest one in the world.
Right. It feels a bit awkward,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, a little. Like they didn't consent to stay here. It's like, okay, so is there a group discussion going on and about whether we're going to stay, and they chose to not consent, and why is there consent required and all that sort of stuff? It's an interesting choice of word there. But
well,
I think
imagine a one-on-one, one ancient and one monk. That might help us simplify.
Yeah, I get the feeling that the intent is pretty clear. If you kind of go over it and say they didn't consent to stay, so they didn't allow themselves, kind of thing, I guess.
And ideally, they don't allow the student to keep them there.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Hmm.
Kind of with
We
your
have-
comment again with getting up on the seat and then getting off. Kind of an agreement to be in that seat of power. Right. You're both playing a game. So
We have several cases that come to mind. We have one where a Zen master says, the seal, the mind seal, basically like there's a game where they play where if I'm enlightened and then you get enlightened after we talk for a while, the mind seal, the transmission of the mind seal, whatever. So it's like, so the seal can be left, but if it's left too long, it is ruined. And then the monk comes up, who becomes a Zen master later. He comes up and he's like, Master, I beg you not to press the seal. We have a case that we talked about relatively recently where someone says, if I did tell you, I would not be bereft of descendants. We have this concept in Zen of leaving no traces, right? And I think that goes back to this is a nest for people these days. The ancients, if they're actually, we can use the word enlightening their students but if we use that word and believe it, then that is keeping the ancients there. But if that process involves the students then seeing them as the end all be all of authority, then the ancients fucked up. Then they didn't enlighten anybody.
Yeah, and you see so many of them. It's one of the things that's a common thread through I think the respected Zen masters who all refer to each other, and we're pretty confident they know each other. They're in the lineage. That they sort of say, you know, don't listen to my words and don't hang on to it, and you know, you've got to see it for yourself. And one of my favorites is that one where the where the guy says he only agreed with his teacher half because you know, out of respect for his teacher wouldn't want him to just sort of, you know, think the same thing as his teacher did. They had this kind of idea of going a bit meta on your teacher, and that like that's what they're teaching them to do is to go further.
Right. With my
There's
about the last lines are, with my staff across my shoulder, I pay no heed to people, like straight into the myriad peaks.
Yeah, we have a quote. I believe it's from Yan Wu. And if I had thought of this earlier, I could have used the handy dandy website called zenmarrow.com to find maybe where it was in the Blue Cliff record. But I think it's in the Blue Cliff record. I think it's Yan Wu, who says straight up, every generation of Zen must surpass the previous, lest the tradition fall.
Right. Yeah. And I think
we have a case where a Zen master, a guy is like, okay, so what is Zen? What is it? And then he's like, if I told you, you'd never forgive me. You know, fast forward in time, the monk's away, and he's named. He later becomes Zen master, but he's off and he's away. I think it was Tozan, and he hears bamboo strike in the distance, gets enlightened, gets on his knees, and shouts to the sky, "Thank you" to his Zen master for not telling him.
I think to your first statement, Dan, I think Blythe says something like, we have to go even beyond Zen. So he, you know, tries to take it another step further.
Yeah.
Then he says something about writing poetry, of course.
I mean, if everything you say isn't poetry, right, you've already fucked up.
Right.
When I was like really like before I said the quote, I was really hardcore thinking, was it Yan Wu or Wansong who said this, or was it Blythe?
Right.
I was like hardcore trying to think of if it was Blythe or not. For a listener, Blythe's another translator, and he's the bomb.
he's a lot of fun.
Cleary's the bomb, but Cleary doesn't give his own. Basically, Blythe did to the Mumoncon, which is another thing like this, what Yan Wu did to the collection of cases and verses, right?
Yeah.
Blythe, the translator, on those cases and verses, added his own commentary and notes in the exact same fashion.
Which is to say, there are other translators like Sakita who are unlike Blythe in that the quality is very different. I think you can just read them both and figure that one out.
Yeah, but Blythe's a really cultured guy, and he brings in all these references to great poems and art and all sorts of stuff. It's really cool.
You feel smarter reading
to
him.
be a scholar. Like, I thought I was getting close to being a scholar. I was in school and I was just taking every elective I could. And I was like, wait, no, I'm nothing compared to this guy. All right, this is something to work towards.
Yeah,
and he does, and maybe it's because he's talking about Zen a lot. But there's an invitation with how his rhetoric works. He's inviting you to be smarter and better, et cetera, and a very while keeping your dignity. He's a lot of fun, but
not demanding.
Right.
But are we having him stay here? And the answer is, how do we? Do we put the value on Blythe? Do we say that where's the value? Where's the light? Is Blythe the one? Is Blythe the light source, or reflection of the moon?
Does that get into the idea of gaining strength? Like when we talk about the Zen lineage developing and each generation being better than the last kind of thing, is that the kind of gaining strength that he's referring to there? Because it feels a little bit like he's sort of going, one of the things that, like a conclusion, if you came to a conclusion, that's kind of like a place to stay. If he sort of says, okay, if you understand my point about not staying here, then the next conclusion you might come to is by not staying here, you gain strength in Zen or something.
Well, the curious thing and why this was confusing to me is that, okay, so we've kind of, I don't know, not exactly two destinations, but two actions, right? Staying here and being on the road is what I picked up. Staying in place apparently makes you stronger, and he doesn't explicitly say being on the road makes you weaker, but the ancients did not gain strength on the road. I don't know what strength means. I think that's what this comes down to, or what it has to do with Zen.
Well, he didn't say staying here makes you stronger, which I want to definitely double down on, because I think it's really easy for they did not gain strength on the road to just, I think it's really
Infer.
easy for us to interpret that as just like, okay, because it's all bullshit, that there is no strength, that, that's, he's pointing out that, even thinking about strength is silly. And so, occupying any position is not as good as the position of moving, right? Also, it's significant that it's translated as the road, which means that we know it's not Dao or capital Way, because clearly would not have translated that as the road, right? So
good distinction. Yeah.
So this is a different kind of road, likely, than the way that they use the word the way, the Dao.
Hmm.
And so, so the strength on the road, what does that even mean? What does strength have to do with it? Like you said, Jim, the first thing I came to mind reading this was ethos. They don't rely on ethos, but I don't know if I'm going to put and for those of you who aren't, what would that even be? Latin nerds? Basically what I mean by that is like a reputation. They're not relying on reputation for their whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I guess in the pointer, we kind of have a hint towards this line, and maybe the case in general. If your potential does not leave its parentheses fixed position, you tumble down into the poisoned sea. If your words don't startle the crowd, you fall into the streams of the commonplace.
If you meditate forever, you'll never go anywhere. And unless you rock crowds and do something to further the Zen lineage, you're a pleb.
Yeah, because he didn't say the ancients skipped here. He said they got here. So you got to get there.
And I like that there's, it's definitely not nihilistic. In the first sentence, we have this idea of potential and it going somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, if it doesn't leave.
Yeah, you're in trouble. Yeah. There's something to lose, certainly. And if your words don't startle the crowd, you fall into the streams of the commonplace.
Now, I think it's valid to at least ask, is that a trap, right? It's like, oh no, commonplace is bad. And Zen Master like, but it's not bad. I don't think a Zen Master, there are a few things that I have seen Zen Masters be like, this is definitively heretical to Zen, which is basically any time that you say like something self-deprecating about your own abilities. But Zen wise, that's the one sin in Zen, is to say I'm not good enough, right? But apart from that,
if we want to take it in a more in a subtle way, or a more subtle way, it's not so much that you have to startle people, but you do have to be your own person,
which can startle people.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, it probably will.
Blythe is startling.
Right. Yes, he is.
Anyone who's read a paragraph by him. Anyone who's read any of his sentences.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to him again, but it is sort of like part of you is like, man, this guy's full of himself, but he deserves it. There's this weird like cockiness that he pulls off. So
it eventually, I think, just becomes he doesn't even have time to be full of himself. First, you're like, he's full of himself. Then you're like, wait, he just doesn't stop.
Yep.
The guy doesn't stop. So he's not like, oh yeah, that was so smart. He's already on to the next thing. I think it's because we haven't done a Mumoncon case in a while, so I'm just like,
right, yeah.
My heart's
been a
like,
while.
I miss Blythe.
Well, let's look at again. He said, "In the end, how is it?" Let's see what we say. I have no idea about this one. I guess it's Yan Wu who does the notes. Correct? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Okay. He says 1,000 people, 10,000 people are sitting right here. Among 1,000 or 10,000 people, 1 or 2 will understand. In the end, how is it? So he's almost saying, it seems like a culmination of the last 2 paragraphs. Right after you've dealt with either staying here or being on the road, in the end, how is it? Is one better than the other? Comes to mind. I don't know.
I think his previous notes might help us out. I don't remember who did. One of you three brought up the illusionary city. That's in Yanwu's note. So the second, for all intents and purposes, the second sentence, the quote, "When the ancients got here, why didn't they consent to stay here?" When the hermit asked that, Yanwu says, "You can't drive stakes into empty space." How great is that? You can't drive stakes into empty space. Provisionally, the hermit sets up an illusionary city to teach.
Right.
You know, and that's great. The idea there being that the trap is, you know, the trap is set the second he picks up the staff.
And that is from another story. I think we ran into it in commentary somewhere. I remember talking about it in one of our casts, I think, where there's like a whole crowd of people and they're moving somewhere. It was like Manjushri or somebody taking them somewhere along a path, and they're all tired and whinging and stuff. So he sets up this city, and so they can rest and feel like they're all good. And then, you know, once they're better, he's like, okay, now it's time to go, and makes the city disappear again.
And Jushi would do that, eh?
I don't know why I have him so associated with like a Loki character. Because like the second you said, man, Jushri's leading these people, I was like horrified. I'm imagining like the Pied Piper gonna lead these people off a cliff. I forget that he's supposed to be the Bodhisattva of compassion.
Well,
I probably got the wrong person.
Well,
it sounds
to
like
Buddhism's
Manjushri.
credit, I remember reading one of, I think it was the Heart Sutra, not the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra. I'm almost certain. One of their first like little anecdotes, and it's a long book and it's extremely repetitious. But one of the first things they say basically is like, you know, we use expedient means, so we'll say whatever, like just right off the bat, we'll just say whatever you need. And just to get you out of the burning house. It's like, that's a weird way to start a, you know, what when you pick up seems like a dogma. So there's definitely a trickster vibe in a lot of these Buddhist characters.
Yeah. And you see a lot of Zen masters make a point to see that happened, right? I mean, you kind of have a branching of what later became Zen with the whole Northern School, Southern School thing. Regardless of the historical validity of it, the mythological validity is still valid. Where, you know, Genghis Khan was able to do what he did, but, you know, his kids couldn't keep it up. Maybe he's not the best. Alexander the Great, you know, he could conquer, but he couldn't keep it going, right? And then it starts squabbling. So you can have one enlightened guy, but if he fucks up the way that he's trying to do it and then says stuff that people make doctrine, well, he fucked up. He didn't enlighten any, you know, he didn't have any enlightened people after him.
I found a little comment in Huang Bo about the city of illusion, which relates to the idea of setting up doctrine. I think it's a translated comment in the middle of section 19, where here, I'll quickly read just the sentence before and then the actual translator note. And it's like, on the 8th day of the 10th month, the master said to me, that which is called the city of illusion contains the 2 vehicles, the 10 stages of a bodhisattva's progress, and the 2 forms of full enlightenment, including the form which leads to the awakening of others. All of them are powerful teachings for arousing people's interest, but they still belong to the city of illusion. And then the translator's note here is, the city of illusion is a term taken from the Lotus Sutra, and here implies temporary or incomplete nirvana. From the point of view of Zen, all the teachings of the many sects based on a belief in gradual enlightenment are likely to lead their followers to the city of illusion, because all of them apparently subscribe to some form or other of dualism.
Ooh.
That's
Shots
a
fired.
mouthful. So that's Huang Bo for you.
Yeah. Hey, that was good stuff, though. It goes to show he's still he's still got a sword for a tongue at times.
The Lotus Sutra stuff, yeah, and the 2 vehicles and that.
Well, we do have Lotus Flower Peak, right?
Oh, true. Yeah.
Mhm.
I did want to look at the note for 4. So that's the line. Because they did not gain strength on the road, Yanmu writes, if you go to the road to discern this, you'll be struggling for half a month's journey. Even if you gain strength, what's it good for? How could there be none at all? And so again, maybe it's an awkward translation, but even if you gain strength, what's it good for? And then right after, how could there be none at all? So is that saying, how could there be no strength?
Yeah. So it looks like he's saying there's strength. Because he didn't say they don't have strength. He said they didn't get it from the road. And this go to the road, I think, is neat. Like, okay, if you think you need to go, Gandalf it up and go research a bunch of stuff to get this, or sit in meditation to get this, or blah, blah, blah. And it's cool that he says half a month's journey, because half a month in China, the Chinese calendar
moon,
at the time would be all before the full moon, right?
Oh, okay.
We have for listeners who haven't checked it out, there's a famous case where Yunmin says, I don't ask you about the first 15 days of the month. What about the second 15? And then it's like, what does that mean? Until you realize the full moon's in the middle. So he's talking about before and after enlightenment. But yeah, so you'll still be struggling for the entire non-enlightenment time of your life. But yeah, he makes this point that there is strength. Like, how could there not be strength? But then if you have it, what are you going to use it for?
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of there's no merit, right? At least it's playing on that sort of meme.
And maybe a little bit.
You're looking for it from Bodhidharma.
First case of the BCR?
Yeah, so the case itself doesn't actually mention the merit. It's the interaction between Bodhidharma and Emperor Wu. This is the who. It focuses on the who is facing me, but then in the notes, Yanwu talks about the no merit thing. And just to be fair to listeners, long story short, Bodhidharma, he's a guy. He comes talk to the emperor. He's a guy. Emperor built a bunch of temples and donated money for this stuff. He's like, how about that? To Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma's like, there's no merit in that.
Yep.
And Emperor's like, what?
Emperor Wu the simp. So I'm going to not think of that case. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I think also maybe the no strength is like effortless. That kind of connotation a bit.
Yeah. I mean, how hard is it to do something that you want to do?
Right.
Like something that you've completely believe in and want to do. And then there's the question, when are you not doing that?
Right, yeah. And if you're wise, you'll know how to use the 24 hours in a day as opposed to them using you.
Hey. Joshu.
Yeah, how hard is it to not make some kind of nest to stay somewhere?
What are you, a bird?
Yeah, for real. Zen masters are vehemently anti-bird, and I approve of that. That's what got me into Zen.
That's what got me into Zen. Is that what you said?
Oh, yeah, that's what got me into Zen. Long-term friends of mine will understand. I have strong thoughts on birds.
And then we have this last sentence. So I'll just read the last paragraph. Again, he said, in the end, how is it? And again, he himself answered in their place. With my staff across my shoulder, I pay no heed to people. I go straight into the myriad peaks. And then on Yanwu's 6th note, still, he deserves 30 blows because he's carrying a board on his shoulders. If you see cheeks on the back of his head, don't go along with him. I don't understand any of that 6th note.
I've read a little bit about that board carrying idea. I forget where I looked it up a little bit, but the idea that you only see half of what you can see because you've got this big board blocking the other half of your vision.
Oh, okay. I just thought of one of those like medieval. What is it called? Where you got your hands and your neck locked up and you're walking around. But I don't think.
Chocks.
And then if you see cheeks on the back of his head, don't go along with him. Is he calling him an ass? Or
yeah, I can't tell if that's an ass thing or if it's like his facial cheeks, like if he's still talking to you, if it seems like if you still see his face.
Oh, interesting.
Because part of me wonders if this is, I'm not going to name any names, but if this is kind of like he's still being dramatic as he leaves, He's like, with my staff on my shoulder, I pay no heed to people. I go straight into the myriad peaks. And so then if you go, oh, okay, so that's the way to do it, like he does. It's like, no, well, that's why he deserves 30 blows. And for the listener, that's a common phrase. And the idea there is 30 blows would kill anybody. Like they're talking like intense whips and stuff.
I like that about the myriad peaks. I didn't think of it. Yeah, I didn't think of it. The last sentence is like, hey, you know, do this epic thing, man. Go into the peaks. You know, do it right. I thought of it as the weeds, but I think it is different.
Yeah, we have references of peaks, like, you know, Deshaun, you know, goes around and just impresses and terrifies everybody, and they're all like, oh, well, this kid's gonna end up being on some super peak, right? And peaks typically seem to correlate with enlightened person versus. That's not necessarily true as a dichotomy. It's not that valleys aren't, because we actually have a thing explicitly about that, but peaks seem to be maybe the opposite of weeds, I might say.
Okay.
And for listener, weeds is like I think like getting caught in the weeds is actually even an English expression. Like
So
it's also a great server, but
Hey, does it mean like the frustration? Like if you got caught in like a stupid bunch of trees and you're trying to, and it's like going through snow, you're stuck in the weeds of this stupid conversation. God damn it, why is this person still?
I think it's like complications. Yeah.
You're in such a bad spot in the conversation that all the words you say are just going to make it worse.
I just never connected it to like an actual physical experience that may have generated the idiom 1,500 years ago.
It's the villain from Tarzan, right?
It's a bit like annoying yourself.
Or seaweed when you're at the lake.
Yeah. Seaweed. Slimy seaweed would be a totally different theme to the analogy. Into the weeds. It would walk in the slime in the slime.
It's like, dude, you're just being weird, man. Why are you trying to have sex with everyone's wife? That's not required in Zen. It's encouraged, but it's not required. That's a joke for the listeners. If any of you have been to Zoto temples and have a personal experience with this, I do apologize for the insensitivity.
I will say, as I was reading this last line, with my staff across my shoulder, I pay no heed to people. Or the last paragraph, in the end, how is it? And then he answers his own question. It just clicked to me how, you know, Zen masters always answer their own questions, and there's something to be said about that. Maybe I always feel like I'm about to say a platitude or some cliche dumb shit when I try to do this, but maybe we always answer our own questions, huh? You know, something like that.
Well, we could apply that to this here, right? So we could say, someone else answers my question, they answer it, and then they leave but they don't consent to stay. If they were a Zen master, they don't consent to continue being the answer of my questions. Okay. So in the moment where they answer my question, you know, but then it's not from them anymore after that. Like I quote so many people in my life, and I'm probably quoting them not exactly how they said it, and I probably am interpreting stuff that they didn't mean. That doesn't matter to me. Right?
It's funny. Yeah, and Blythe does this a lot. Dan, you've done it a lot. Yeah, Michael Scott's done it too, which is interesting. And I just think
we have a lot in common, the three of us.
But it is I think you can get away with it. It's a dangerous thing potentially, but yeah, you can quote other people and mean different things than what they did.
Yeah, and the Zen masters do that with some of their memes as well. It's like, you know, they'll use it this way 1,000 times, and then a guy comes along and he'll use it in a different way. And everybody's like, hang on, that's not what it meant. He's like, it does now.
It's like, mind is Buddha. Shit, everybody went off the wrong way.
They're writing that shit.
Mind is not Buddha.
Oh no, I'm tangled. Oh no.
Right.
So I went and tried to do some digging up on that seeing the jowls from behind their head thing to see if there was some meaning in Chinese or anything. I couldn't find anything.
Wait, it's about jowls behind your head, not cheeks?
It in another translation I read jowls. It is a thing that's come up more than
jowls about teaching too much?
Well, at least tells us it's probably not the butt. I hope
So you can see the dude's shells flapping because they're so big, even when his head's turned around. That's a big burn, dude. This is an old school burn.
I think that's kind of what it's either like from the back, he's smiling so big that his cheeks stick out, but he's turned his back to you, so he's got this internal evil thing.
Okay, yeah.
He's staring with you.
These would
Or-
be very skinny people. These subsistence farmers that walk everywhere.
I'm the least skinny of you guys, and I reckon I've got more of a chance of exposing my jowls from behind my head. But,
For listener, we're all sitting here. We're all sitting here trying to.
I just want to touch on something in the commentary. Sometimes you'll hear this idea of function in Zen. They have the perception, but not the function, or vice versa. And so it's just interesting to kind of touch on places where we see this meme being used. So in the commentary, for more than 20 years, there was never. Oh, let me redo that. So in the commentary, they're talking about the line, when the ancients got here, why didn't they consent to stay here? So Jan Wu writes, for more than 20 years, there was never even one person who could answer. This one question has both provisional and true, both illumination and function. Yeah, I just wanted to point out. So it's an important line. It's a very loaded line, it seems.
I think that's totally tied into what you were talking about with the way that they answer themselves. And I think going all the way back to the Mumon Khan introduction, whether you swallow the ball of iron, it feels like swallowing it, and you can't swallow it, you can't spit it out, or being a mute, unable to speak. Like a lot of the times, these questions, like the guy hanging from the tree and all that, they seem like they're intended to put you in this position between a rock and a hard place, and then the Zen master's like, speak. Right. You know what I mean? Jam up all the options and then force you to still do something. It's a little bit like, I think relating to the acausality of enlightenment. It's like, do something outside the physics of the universe. You know what I mean? In some ways, that's the function, Jam up all the causality and then something pops out. It's like Big Bang kind of shit.
Yeah, they force you into all the complications and then...
Well, I like that because then the function is on the Zen master. And I've been sitting here thinking, illumination and function. Zen is at least the canonical answer. Not the Zen has canon, but like I can say it does, and now I did. And Zen is seeing your true nature, right? It's not about how to be. It's not about any of that. It is a tradition of people seeing their true nature. What does that mean? Well, they named it Zen. It's this thing that we have a name for, and that's one way to put it, right? So, but then there's the it seems like all of these people who do that, and we can call that enlightenment. We can say get enlightened if you want. It seems like there are some common properties, common side effects, I like to call them, right? Like compassion and things like that, like liberation. These seem to be common side effects, right? And I think we definitely see teachers kind of we see Zen masters pull techniques from other Zen masters as they will. And I wonder if what he's saying here, this one question has both provisional and true, both illumination and function. I wonder if he's saying it's both a useful question that to spark enlightenment, but also one that even if you're already enlightened, it can be a useful tips and tricks for you. I've quoted him before as an example of somebody who knows if this is how he meant it. But I had a professor, Therese, who I've said it before on the podcast, he's like, you have to be very, very careful when a student's asking you a question, and you need to try to think beyond the question to where that question's coming from. Because even if you answer the question technically correctly, but you misguessed where it was coming from, you can just steer them off in the wrong direction. And so I think that might be part of the function here of, okay, so you're enlightened now, but make sure you don't consent to stay there when you are there.
Nice.
What was it? Baizhang's 3 phases, right? And the last one is basically like, don't get don't get obsessed on the fact that of what your true nature is now that you've seen it. Don't just constantly think about that.
Hmm.
Beijing is also known as is that Hayakujo
Yeah,
or Nick?
Hyakujo. Hyakujo, yeah.
And I think
As a-
Linji or Huangbo or a couple of guys are like, I've now explained it to you, but don't think this is it.
Yeah.
As a meta note, as you were saying that, Dan, we're talking about function and illumination. I want to make a slight comparison to, how should I phrase this? So, how confusing Zen can be, because it, like you said, Dan, it's not talking about how to be or how to live a good life, et cetera, et cetera. So if you read this and say you're a Taoist, when the ancients got here, why didn't they consent to stay here? Well, go with the flow, keep going. Let's see, no true. Well, I guess this is somewhat what Zen talks about, but the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And then you got, because they did not gain the strength on the road, a big thing in Taoism is staying weak. Interestingly enough, it's the
Water, yeah.
it's
While
the
others are
yin.
strong, I am weak. While there's
Right. Be like water, because water's weak and overflows and flows over the strong, like rocks and stuff like that.
Cuts the stone, yeah.
Right. And then with my staff across my shoulder, I pay no heed to people. That's also similar in Taoism. But the biggest difference between Zen and Taoism is that Zen isn't trying to tell you how to go with the flow or have a lot of yin energy or how to live a long, good life, which it explicitly says it's about. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
I like that meta approach itself of, okay, how would something that appeared in a similar time period, I mean, yes, Taoism's much older than Chinese Zen, at least, but you know what I mean. How might they view it? Is a way to like course correct. And listeners, a lot of people you may have heard from some people like, Zen is what happens when Buddhism and Taoism come together in China, and then you get Zen. And while I say that's not the case, I do think it's fair to say that the references, the terminology of both, the actual language with which Zen is being, like, physics is not math, but physics speaks in math, right? Kind of like that. The language of Taoism and Buddhism, I mean, the way, right? Like,
It's kind of like when I started learning about Zen, that was a very easy way to understand it. Now it's more like Buddhism mixed with the style of the Chinese culture. And I think that's a good way to sum it up, because there isn't a lot of Taoist stuff. There's some common stuff, but they're not really related in the crucial way that they would have to be to make the connection. So it's a stylistic thing. God damn, is it a better style than OG fucking Buddhism? No offense to it, but
I mean, yeah. I mean, you said it's in such a fun way. Zen masters just consider, like, Buddha, Gautama Buddha, another Zen master. Right? He's just another Zen master. And really, like, there's like, before this time period, when I mentioned Bodhidharma earlier, he's called the first patriarch in Zen. And the idea there is he had his Zen master in India who sent him to China, but then he was like the 49th or something. And the idea being, if you track it all the way back, it goes all the way back to Buddha. And so Zen kind of sees the rest of the Buddhists as like, you guys got it wrong. It's not a revitalization movement, though, and that's really important to note. But yeah, like the language, like you said, or at least the language that we see.
Yeah. And I think even relating to this case specifically, that it's like they seem to think that the Buddhists and the different branches and churchy type organizations that formed around the Buddhist teaching are people kind of making these nests, and they do, like we said earlier, they do to their own memes this rewriting of the meaning and stuff. They do it to Taoism, they do it to whatever tools they've got as analogies and things to communicate with.
Right. And like I said earlier, they do so explicitly. But it's funny how, like I said, in the Lotus Sutra, one of the oldest Buddhist texts, I think, first thing they say is like, we'll just say whatever we need to say. And I think that admittedly is a slippery slope while being pretty cool. It's not guaranteed.
It's poetic license. Then there's also, a quantity with a quality all its own. It's something significant that we have 100 different cases with commentary and verses from 2 different Zen masters, but the cases involve a large number. I almost said myriad as if it was a normal English word. It involves a large a variety of various Zen masters and stories. So if you do misinterpret X, that can be less of an issue if you're just reading all these, which is why I'm so vehemently against, this practice that people seem to take of, okay, I was assigned a koan, I'm going to study that one koan. I'm like, no, you're getting trapped. No, you just read through them all, and if you fall asleep halfway through it and you don't feel like reading it the next day, just skip it to the next one. Nobody cares.
Well, talk about a fucking nest. I mean, that's just, yeah.
Yeah, no, well said. Yeah. And but you also have, there is a certain amount of poetic license you can have on top of that. We have a case where a guy is in front of the Buddha statue, and the guy's like, "Oh, are you gonna bow to the Buddha statue?" And he's like, "Fuck you, no, I'm not." And I think it was Linji or something. And then we have Huang Bo is bowing to a Buddha statue, and then a guy's like, "Wait, I thought we didn't do that." And he's like, "Fuck you, I'll bow if I wanted to, right?" So like, if I'm not religious, but I think the 12-step program is a useful tool for me to use, and I go to AA for that, I can do that with poetic license, right? Without being chained to a doctrine. I'm like, well, this is just really useful. Like, if I want to do long division, that's okay for me to do, right? So things like the Eightfold Path and stuff like that, I could see a Zen master who's enlightened, like, just be like, okay, this is a useful like set of like base rules that I'll just use as a template. The difference is that attachment to it or not. And notice the Eightfold Path, the last step is, hey, don't get attached to this thing you've been doing for God knows how long. Whereas Zen's like, well, let's just start with that. Let's just get rid of that issue to begin with.
I think that's when, like, if you apply this rule all the way through, if to give your example, if you're not going to make a nest in this concept of never making nests, and someone turns around and says, what are you doing in this 12-step program? It's like, I'm not attached to not making nests in things. I'll make nests once in a while if I want to. You know what I mean?
Fuck you, I want to. It's my right. Yeah, and we get and Zen masters will even explicitly talk about, that borrowing of traditions and language and ideas. The one that I always like to bring up is Yan Wu says in the Blue Cliff Record, I can take a blade of grass and use it as a golden foot Buddha statue, and then vice versa, and I feel like that happens a lot. I feel like that's almost ubiquitous. And the only reason it seems to stand out is because we're working with a culture that's so independently originated from all the cultures that led to what is the current. Now we're going through the second Renaissance, but before that, from ours,
is the root word of culture cult?
Is what?
Is the root word of culture cult?
Yeah, I was thinking about that once. I was like, I'm willing to bet cult is just short for they didn't know what else to call it.
I wanted to say about the poetic license. There's something so crucial, I think, about poetic license and grokking Zen. And I think I could use Blythe as proof of that, because that dude, that quote, that paraphrase of him I did earlier was like, we have to go beyond Zen. I'm almost certain, I'll look it up, that right after he says, do poetry, because it's beyond Zen. But I also wanted to say poetic license.
And even if that's not what he said, it is what he said now.
Right. Yeah. There's something to that. And I think we use poetic license all the time. We just don't see it as poetic license. And you could make a very controversial statement and that's what religion is to some extent, is poetic license. And then just forgetting that it's kind of you doing it to some degree. It's extremely useful and meaningful, but
Yeah, it's like when I was, in high school or middle school, and I just hear from whatever, like, yeah, so like Galileo, or not Galileo's painting, Michelangelo's painting, right? It looks like the parts of the brain touching God. And I'm like, okay, people are just looking for shit where they want to look for shit. It's just coincidence. These people are dumb. And then I get older and I think, and I'm like, oh wait,
maybe
hold on a second. Maybe he's reminding us that it was poetic license, that there's some poetic license going on. But
which as a disclaimer, I don't think takes away. It seems like it would take something crucial away, but I don't think it does. I think the heart of religion is in the poetic license. And that's something you got to wrestle with.
If you're doing it by accident, it's not poetic license, right? That's the difference between a grammar error and poetic license in the first place. So if you're not the poet doing it, then you are just incorrect.
Sound like a really mean teacher, Dan. You're gonna be a really mean English teacher someday. Like, look, it's a grammar mistake. It doesn't make it poetry.
Yeah.
Then I have to come in and just give me an essay in a physics class of 3 pages of just commas, and I'm like, excellent. 100.
I think that's an interesting journey for the way I felt about Zen stuff. It's like I've watching people more so sort of double check themselves against what Zen masters say, to say, yeah, I'm on the right track, and then you read a lot, and then you find out that one time they'll say one thing, and then the next minute they'll say the other thing. And you get other people coming along and going, oh, don't get so obsessed in the words. Zen is a living thing. You don't get into the books. And it's like, yeah, but if they're going to say one thing and then they're going to say the opposite thing the next day, what are they saying? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Reference intersection, baby. Or also just being like, well, fuck, they took that the wrong way. Okay, let me try a different one. It's like, okay, guys, you stop with that, You come down and now they're, building a golden calf statue to Baal, and you're like, that's not what I meant.
Right, I think I said on the last podcast that we did, or it was a couple ago. Can't remember.
Sometime in the past or future.
Right. Yes, exactly. Zen masters are geniuses because they're reacting to a narrative that's given to them from a monk. They're reacting to the potential narratives they're giving the monk via their answer. And I had a third one. There's like a thesis and an antithesis in everything they say.
Yeah.
And so there's that's a hard thing to do. That's not easy. I mean, they're kind of writing a narrative and a commentary on the narrative. I mean, this book, for example, they're constructing a narrative by choosing the cases and the principles to talk about. And then at the same time, they have to work around how to not make anything a nest, to go with the meme we're using today. That's really hard.
Track.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave no track. The bird path.
Right.
If it wasn't for the fact that we hate birds.
Yes, right.
Well, it's not that it's not that I hate them. It's just factually the case that they are the worst, with some exceptions. But I'll do that on another podcast, or maybe at the end if we have time. But yeah, this book is in probably like my 5 books. Aliens show up and they're like, all right, give us 5 books from you guys.
Right. Oh,
this is there'll be some Plato, there'll be this, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners got into Zen, or at least tangentially to that. The Alan Watts thing, right? And everyone likes the quote, "The menu is not the meal," right? Mm-hmm. And so I think maybe one way to unpack, I think what a lot of us are thinking here when we say poetic license in this context, make that a little bit more explicit maybe, is once you recognize that the menu is not the meal, it doesn't mean you can't use the menu. You don't do the Portlandia thing and show up to the restaurant and like, this menu is bullshit. I want to see what the meal looks like. And then they show you an example and you're like, that's not the meal I'll be given because Heraclitus bullshit. My meal will look different. Nobody does that, right? So it's like, yeah, I can use the menu knowing that the menu is not the meal. And, he can use his staff. I can get there without having to stay there.
Or you could just eat the menu.
Yeah.
Mm.
I learned from It's Always Sunny eating a contract doesn't always nullify the contract, but it does if it's the only one.
Right. There you go. All right, yeah. So should we look at Zuidao's verse?
I reckon we should.
All right, very cool. I guess I'll read it if you guys are okay with that. And just
Yeah.
alone, and then we can do the give and take sort of setup. Where you read the notes and someone reads the line. So here's the verse for, once again, my dear listener. Case 25 of the Blue Cliff Record. And this is by not Yan Wu, but Zuidao. Here it is. Dust and sand in his eyes, dirt in his ears. He doesn't consent to stay in the myriad peaks. Falling flowers, flowing streams, very fast. Suddenly raising my eyebrows to look. Where has he gone? Well, I'll cut that together so it actually is has a nice tempo. But I guess we'll read that again. Scott, do you want to read the notes?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to give a shout out to that first line, even before we do. That's the opening of a movie. You see the horizon, you see the figure walking
All right.
up,
Right.
crossing over the dune.
Dust and sand in his eyes, dirt in his ears. Oh, wow, I forgot his name. Who's the main evil guy in the Tower series for at least the first 2 books?
Walter.
But what do they call him? The Man in Black.
The man, yeah, that is exactly who I was thinking of. I didn't know if that'd be too niche a reference. That's a first. That's for me to worry about that. But yep, I'm so glad that we had the same thought. For listeners who haven't read the Dark Tower series, like, oh my god, you have to. Anyways,
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey is a legend.
dude, Interstellar, come on, so good. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, classic.
Oh yeah.
Same movies, weirdly enough. Same
How dare
universe it
you.
is. Yeah.
Same universe, I'll give you. I like
Okay,
that. I like that. He just told her, and he's like, you know what, the ad market's not for me. I'm gonna go be an astronaut.
All right, here we
And then he
go.
was in Contact.
Once again, 25th case of the Blue Cliff Record. Zuidao's verse. Dust and sand in his eyes, dirt in his ears.
Blocked up with tons of dirt. What limit is there to the confusion? There are other such people.
He doesn't consent to stay in the myriad peaks.
Where will you go? But say, what scene is this?
Falling flowers, flowing streams, very fast.
A good scene. With the lightning flash intellect, if you vainly toil, tarrying in thought, look to the left. 1,000 lives. Look to the right. 10,000 aeons.
Suddenly raising my eyebrows to look. Where is he gone?
Right beneath your feet, another pair of eyes is given to you. From the beginning, he's just been right here. Have you cut off the hermit's footsteps? Although it's like this, it's still necessary to get to this realm to begin to attain. I'll hit, saying, why is he just right here?
There's a speak moment for you, right? Like you could
right.
forget everything else. A monk comes into your monastery, and just by virtue of coming in, you just run over to him, smack him, and say, "Why is he just right here?" In fact, that question is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's a hard fucking question too, because even if he grokked the first half, then he's like, why is he just right here? It's like nonsensical. It's like, well, fuck, that's a tough one.
Well, it's great because it breaks the people who, who make the formula out of it. And they're like, okay, so it's me, and that's the answer. It's all just that. And then it's like, but that's not going to help you answer that question.
Right.
Why is he just right here?
Yeah, it reminds you of the lead ball in your throat.
Yeah.
And there was Zen masters who did that, right? Guys who would, hit people as soon as they walked in the monastery. Like that.
Yeah, there were.
Yeah.
Zen is about being tranquil, but tranquil ain't what you thought it was.
Well, that was the previous generation, right? They moved past that.
Yeah. There was one generation where they just think there definitely was a Wild West era that I think it was the generation right after Nansen and Bai Jiang. All their kids, all their kids are some wild rascals, and then their kids, and then it settled back down again.
Yeah. So when I'm reading this verse, who is he? Who is Zui Dao describing? Who is this guy with dirt and sand in his eyes and ears?
I mean, who is he? Right?
Right.
Who is she?
Yeah,
What
it
gender
doesn't-
is Buddha?
The statues in China make it pretty ambiguous.
To be explicit with the listener, it doesn't seem to me that Zui Dao is talking about the monk, or I mean, the unnamed monk. What do they call him?
The hermit of
hermit.
Lotus Flower Peak.
Yeah.
Well, not just him. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. And then
I
we
like
have,
that.
Go on, Scott.
Sorry, good. The one that jumped out to me, that second line, he doesn't consent to stay in the Myriad Peaks. Like
Right.
that connects the first and the second part of the case. And one of the links there, I think, we talked it in the first part. It talks about, and in the commentary, he said not going to the road. Well, they didn't gain strength on the road. And then he's like, I'm going to go off into the Myriad Peaks. I assume he's kind of following a road or something, at least part of the way there. So there's kind of a link about, not staying somewhere, and then he's wandering off into the peaks. And then in the verse, we get this connection between the beginning part and the end part.
Well, yeah, and in fact, it says, in the end of the case, it says, I go straight into the Myriad Peaks. And then the verse says, he doesn't consent to stay in the Myriad Peaks. So again, we have this kind of like, oh, do this. Oh, don't do that. So you can't rest anywhere. There's no place to rest.
We get in the commentary a bit of a story where Yanwu tells us, he says, Master Shandao of the Stone Grotto, when he was subject to persecution of 845, for your listener, emperors come and go, and some want to crack down on people. There's stuff. Okay, so during a period of Buddhist persecution, he would always take his staff and show it to the assembly and say, all the Buddhas of the past are thus, all the Buddhas of the future are thus, all the Buddhas of the present are thus. Okay? We mentioned that Yunmin, the dragon, just swallowed the universe, etc. And then Yanwu goes on, after telling that anecdote, he says, one day in front of the monks' hall, Zui Feng, another Zen master, held up his staff and showed it to the crowd, saying, this one is just for people of medium and low facilities, trying to trick him with the Jesus talk. And then Yanwu continues, at the time, there was a monk who came forward and asked, when you unexpectedly encounter someone of the highest potential, then what? So now we get this potential thing. So the guy holds up his staff and says, this one is just for people of medium and low faculties. So then the monk asks about the high potential. So he says, when you encounter someone of the highest potential, then what? Then Feng picked up his staff and left. So we get that. So he leaves, right? When he stays with the staff, it's for the low and the medium, but for the highest, he leaves. He picks up his staff and takes it with him. Yunmin said, another Zen master, upon this story, Yunmin said, I am not like Zui Feng when it comes to breaking up confusion. Zui Feng being the guy who we just talked about, who left with his staff. Yunmin said, I am not like Zui Feng when it comes to breaking up confusion. So a monk asked, how would you do it, teacher? And Yunmin immediately hit him. And so we kind of get reference intersection. He bombards us with 3 different stories, all kind of jiving with this. Why is he right here? Why does the other one go? What is up with this potentiality stuff? And we get, and Yanwu continues a little bit in the next paragraph where he says, you must simply spit them all out at once. Afterwards, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying down 24 hours a day, you fuse everything into one. Then, though you're on the tip of a hair, it's as broad as the universe. Though you dwell in a boiling cauldron or in a furnace or in furnace embers, it's like being in the land of peace and happiness. So even if you dwell in a boiling cauldron or furnace embers, it's like being in the land of peace and happiness. Though you dwell amidst gems and jewels in profusion, it's like being in a thatched hut, right? That makes me, I think that's related to what we were talking about with, oh man, I lost my train of thought with all that imagery of jewels. We were talking about the...
Why is he right here?
Yeah.
And the student of the highest potential.
In the end, how is it? That's the question.
Ah.
Yeah. And he's saying it's like that, right?
Okay, right.
And that effortlessness that we talked about earlier.
Yeah,
I think it's a great question, because it's like, normally you would ask someone who has experience or who knows, yeah. And if the Zen master's turning around and asking you, in the end, how is it?
Oh,
Then there's an immediate temptation to sort of go, why are you asking me? Why would I know that?
that's a cool way to ask it, because I always, you always read these Zen masters as if they're asking rhetorical questions that they have the answer for.
Yeah.
But maybe you're just like, hey, so at the end of things, what's the answer? I don't know. That's nice.
At the end of the day, if it's not a drive-by, it's not a Zen master, right? and we get this. Yan Wu kind of doubles down on himself, and he says, "Why did I say," quoting himself, "if you see cheeks on the back of his head, don't go along with him"? So Yan Wu, towards the end of his commentary, references how he said that earlier. And Yan Wu says, "Why did I say that? As soon as you make comparative judgment, you're in the demon cave of the mountain of darkness making your living." So he exaggerates a little bit, but so he said, as soon as you make comparative judgment, as soon as you're like him versus me, he's like, that's what I meant by the cheeks on the back of the head. Don't
Nice.
go along with him. The second you're like, oh, but okay, so am I doing the thing that he said? You're making comparative judgments between you and him. Yeah, you did that. You're not doing it.
Right, yeah, don't follow him. I like that.
And then he says, if you can see all the way through and your faith is thoroughgoing, then naturally 1,000 or 10,000 people won't be able to trap you or do anything about you. When pushed or pressed, you will kill or give life spontaneously. Sui Dao understood the hermit's meaning when he said, I go straight into the myriad peaks. At this point, he begins to make his verse. And then that's like his fun segue to throwing it to the poem that we just read, which is cool. Which almost, allows us to view this poem in a way where the dust and sand in his eyes, blah, blah, blah. This is the image of the man after he's left. He got here and now he's continuing on. He doesn't consent to stay in the myriad peaks even.
Yeah, with that, if I can, there's another poem which was in the first part of the case, or first section in the commentary on the case, of another Zen master, Heisao Tao?
Zui Dao.
Zui Dao. Okay, that's Zui Dao. That's what I thought.
Yeah, the Wade Giles of that is hard.
Yes. Wait, so is Zui Dao his Chinese? Is this how you pronounce Zui Dao?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's how you would pronounce Zui Dao.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, the pinyin is Xuedou. Zui Dao.
Wow.
And
Okay.
then, yeah, dude. For listeners who don't understand what letters we're looking at that make that sound, not the one that begins with the next that I just said, but there's another one. Go ahead and get Cleary's Blue Cliff record yourself. It's really worth
figure
having.
it out.
The X
Well, yeah,
is
so-
usually a sh sound.
okay.
Schweder.
Wow.
Yeah, I gave up at the very beginning of Duolingo of having the correct pronunciation.
Like
Maybe
four
it'd be useful
different
to do a little touch up though. But yeah, so the poem.
Yeah, from the first part of the commentary, and it's by Zweidau, I guess. It's a different one than his verse. So who, confronting the situation, brings it up without deception? Such a person is rare. He destroys the steep, lofty peaks. He melts down the mysterious subtlety. The double barrier has been wide open. Adepts do not return together. The jade rabbit now round, now partial. The golden raven seems to fly without flying. Old Lou doesn't know where he's going. To go along together as before with the white clouds and flowing streams. So I really like that with what we're talking about, some of the lines to really hype on the not following. Adepts do not return together. Or
That line stood out to me. That was the exact line.
Old Lou doesn't know where he's going. To go along together as before with the white clouds and flowing streams. So there's an interesting kind of, I don't like these words, but dualistic, monistic vibe near the end.
Workman Lou is it the sixth patriarch, I think?
Is that right?
Old Lou?
I think he was the illiterate one who was snuck away in secret.
Yeah. Huining, yeah. Huining. I just talked about my pronunciation. For the listener, this is a great reason to buy the books.
Yeah. So you don't have
I'm definitely not pronouncing it correctly, accurately. I'm pronouncing it the way I want to pronounce it, goddammit. I'm taking poetic license with it. See? Easy peasy, easy as that.
I also like, we were just talking about how Zen masters kind of bring up almost rhetorical questions or ideas or points and then ask you what it all means at the end. And then in this case, we see that, right? When of the ancients got here, why didn't they consent stay here? Because they did not gain strength to the road. In the end, how is it? What do you think? And then in the poem, we have who, confronting the situation, brings it up without deception. Such a person is rare. And I highlighted just those 4 lines because that's kind of what the Zen master does. It's confronting the situation, which might be the nature of yourself, brings it up without deception, doesn't let you turn them into a pillar of authority. Such a person is rare. And then it just starts describing him. So I like that, confronting the situation. That's kind of what Zen masters are doing all the time. And then bringing it up without deception. That's the difference between Soto and a real Zen master, but that's a different...
Well, that, and we also could see confronting the situation, bring it up without deception, not trying to fool myself about what I'm seeing. Right.
Not ignoring, right? Another way to put it.
Yeah. Like the ultimate version of like literally not ignoring anything. So that means turning around all the time? No, because then you're ignoring the front. That's not what we mean by ignore.
And yeah, sorry.
No, that's it. I was just going to repeat the line.
Because brings it up without deception, such a person is rare. And then they start describing what that looks like. So bringing it up with deception might look like someone who destroys the steep, lofty peaks, melts down the mysterious subtlety and the spooky language.
There isn't this, I need to be up there thing.
Right. Yeah.
And then there isn't this, I'll never be able to know that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a mystery. So it's interesting they use mystery. I like the idea of mystery, but there isn't a secret to the universe that you don't have.
Yeah. You can leave a code. You can leave a letter outside my door that's in code language, and I can look at it and not know what it translates to in English. And I can call that a mystery, in itself, but there is no mystery that I am looking at what I am looking at, right? There is no mystery of what I am seeing.
Right.
And I think that's where like the whole intellectual thoughts language gets what I'm going to call misinterpreted. When they're like, okay, there's no mystery in that realm until intellectual thoughts are added. That doesn't mean all intellectual thoughts are added, guys. What we're saying is that until those in the realm where those aren't, there's not a mystery.
And yeah, I like that addition because if you look at it with the lightning flash intellect, if you vainly toil tarrying in thought, look to the left, and then 1,000 lives, look to the right, 10,000 eons. So I like the idea that it says with the lightning flash intellect. I'm pretty sure lightning is usually used as the moment of enlightenment.
Yeah.
And so it's not exactly explicit, but it almost seems like they're not throwing away the intellect. They're saying with the lightning flash intellect, boom, you need that to perceive it. Arguably, at least it seems they're almost talking about that action or function of perception that you were getting at, Dan, where you can see it's a code, and that's more what it's about than not understanding what it is. And then you have this other side, which is vainly toiling in it. Which, this secret note has the secret of the universe that I need, and so on and so forth.
And most translations, like in the Blue Cliff record, I don't think we've talked about any where it officially gives the punchline, but most of the times where I've seen it say, what we would maybe call the monk was enlightened. Most of the stuff in the in what I'll call the Big Four, the Blue Cliff record, Book of Serenity, Mumonkan, and Shobo, I don't really see the word enlightened very often at all. I see much more frequently, so-and-so had a great realization. I see the word realization far more often than I see the word enlightened, which I like better because it reminds us that you don't like transform into like a non-human being, right? Which I think causes a lot of issues with Buddhism is they over-deified it. They made it a steep, lofty peak. It's like, no, it's just a thing, right? Like he just had a realization.
When I think of realization, it's like, oh, hey, I realized, well, I'm just repeating it, but I realized there was a new way to think about this thing. Whereas enlightenment is like, I get everything. Everything's perfect.
Yeah. It's like Zen masters don't mean you're omniscient. Like you can still beat them at, Battleship.
Yeah.
They might
There's
hit
some
you
quote about, if you never lose Dharma combat or something, I forget what it is, but it's like saying, that's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the way you put it, he's like, if you beat a Zen master in Dharma combat, you're now a Zen master, but that doesn't make them not a Zen master.
Right.
Right? Like, it's cool.
Damn, that's mean because I'll never meet one. So,
I mean, we have examples of Zen masters getting enlightened without another human being Zen master in front of them for it, right? I mean, one like the most literal example being Banki, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And for listeners, we haven't talked about him. He's a little bit later than this in Japan. Kind of like found out that everybody talking about Zen didn't actually know, and they just all told him they had been parroting. And he was like, "Wait, for generations we've just been parroting without knowing anything about this?" And they were like, "Yeah." And they weren't like being spooky speech, like no, like they legit just. So he's like, "Well, I'm gonna figure it out." So he kind of like rederides Zen, which is really impressive. But in his, but he didn't seem to be very good at teaching it because we don't hear much about it after that, except for him. We don't hear many of his students. But shit, I was gonna go somewhere with that, and then I got distracted by Bleach. I don't remember.
Well, very good. How are we feeling? Do we want to end on Bleach?
Right. Anytime I think of Japan, right? Just Ichigo Kurosaki.
Yeah.
But
that was a really good exploration. I feel like what was hanging me up was that that which line was it? The in the case where not gaining strength on the road.
Yeah, same.
that question about strength. Yeah.
I got caught up with I really like how you guys took it. I was not very imaginative.
This is now for me. It's a really great example of a case that argues against gradualism sort of stuff because of that line. I think the way we dug into it there, it's a little bit like yeah.
They didn't travel there. They didn't get there because the power of the road gave them.
You could even just say, what good is your strength?
What are you going to use it for?
Right. And if they think
then
they
the answer, I don't think that's a rhetorical question.
Nah.
It took me a long time to not just like suspect, but like grok, like be able to read it with the default intuition of that these are written as in second person. These texts are not written in third person or first person. It's not written like like a philosophy text, like where you speak as if you're speaking to the reader, but you're not quite. These are literally written as if like with the expectation, like the questions are questions to you. And that's such a skill, and that's such a unique thing. I mean, Lemony Snicket doesn't even get to this ability. And he's the only example I could really think of growing up of what you really see as a second person. Well,
and I also think there's something, I was thinking about this today, really gratifying with reading Zen, because I think you can derive some, I wouldn't exactly call them philosophical perspectives on life per se. You could, but you can definitely kind of get an attitude, adapt to an attitude from reading Zen. At least I have over time. And that's really rewarding because they don't just, there's something to wrestle with. Unlike a philosophy book or something like that, where they just have all the ideas. It's kind of this already formed thing, and it's fully explained, and you kind of have to follow along and just agree with it or disagree with it. This isn't even that explicit. You don't even know what you're agreeing with or disagreeing with. It's not a treatise.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
No
and so you're
made.
struggling completely, constantly.
Yeah.
They have all these metaphors with it. That's really rewarding, and there's a richness that comes with it. Like you can really get a character from struggling with it.
It exposes like your own thoughts about things, and
totally exposed.
Yeah.
Well, that's the craziness. It's not Zen. It's not like, a lot of people will say that they don't, but they do. Like Zen literally in no aspect of it says like has as the thing a conclusion, or like a claim or a statement of truth. There's not even linguistically a definitive thing about Zen. Zen is a tradition that involves it's a how-to, but it's not a how-to with clear instructions. It's like a tutorial. Okay, well, this guy did this, and then this guy did this, and you just see a bazillion examples, and it's the best we can do.
It's like a game. It's like a video game combined its tutorial section with the main body of the game, and so it's all happening at once. Yeah.
It's like if I was going to teach you Spanish, but the way I did that was just give a bunch of excerpts of Spanish language.
Right.
This guy said this, and it's just all in Spanish. I don't translate it. And then this guy said this, and it's all in Spanish, and I don't translate it. And I just keep doing that to you.
Well, very good. Should we do a outros? Do you want? I wonder if people listen this far. I really do. I don't know, because I don't listen that far with podcasts.
Have you ever put on a podcast and then just like stopped it after you're already halfway through? I have not.
No. But I have stopped when I get to the very end. Although I don't listen to many, and then I go to the next episode. Yeah, because they're doing like, hey, thanks for our Patreon. These are their names, and here's some stuff I'm not interested in. So
the credits rolling. Maybe we need to be sneakier about it. Or if they're skipping it, they've already heard it. They know what we want them to do. And for listeners who don't, what we want you to do is leave us 5 stars on however you listen to your podcast. Tell your friends, tell your family. Tell your family with forewarning. Tell them they're gonna hear. Tell them they're gonna hear some crazy deep shit, right? But if you like it, do that. If you didn't like it, definitely make sure you tell everybody about how you didn't like it. Send them links. Leave us a 5-star review, and then in that you can tell us what you didn't like about it. That way we see it.
Very good. Thank you. This was Jim. I was the host. Insert clever reference to case here.
With my Sierra Nevada in my fist, I shall go into the depths of my bedroom.
Oh, I'm gonna find one of those as well. This was Scott. I guess this is how it is in the end.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. See you guys.